All right, I'd like to start by acknowledging that wherever we are, so long as we're in Australia, we're on unceded Indigenous lands, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I want to share that I am on Wurundjeri land, and most of the work that I've done for the mentoring program, which we're going to talk about, and most of the work I've done for this seminar have been done on Wurundjeri land. And I want to, thank Indigenous peoples for generations for their continued care of the land. So welcome everyone. My name is Tessa Zirnsak. I'm a consumer academic in social work and social policy, and I'm also the leader of the Lived Experience Mentoring Program, which this seminar is a part of, although some of you won't be in the mentoring program, and these seminars are designed to be public facing. So for the first hour, we're going to have some fantastic speakers, Indigo and Ash, who I will introduce in a minute, and then for the last half hour, it'll just be the mentors and mentees. And so we'll get a chance to really talk about the program. So I'm so delighted. This program's been a lot of work, and we've really built on the work of other lived experience experts who have paved the way. And so this is a real, this is really exciting for me. So our first speaker is going to be Indigo Daya. I just need to refer to my notes, so just give me 1 second to sort out my my screen, sorry. Oops. I'm just going to have to stop sharing while I refer to those. But it's okay because Indigo is going to do her slides in a moment. Sorry, so Indigo Daya is a PhD candidate at UNSW, and she's a MAD/survivor artist, peer supporter, and activist. Indigo has held consumer roles, survivor/consumer roles across the mental health system for 18 years, including in education, advocacy, policy and reform, consulting, and peer-delivered programs. She has extensive experience in participatory approaches as a past participant, leader, educator, and senior advisor. Her PhD explores survivor-led approaches to peer support, which are grounded in creative arts, epistemic justice, and anti-carceral ethics. Indigo identifies as a psychiatric survivor and takes a critical position on systematic harms and misuse of power in service delivery and participatory practices. And then I'll do, sorry, Ash, I'm going to change the plan and do Ash's introduction right before Ash speaks. So without any more from me, I'm going to hand over to Indigo. Fantastic. Okay, off you go, Indigo. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you. Thank you so much. Am I sharing the correct screen? You can see the big slide. Yep, great. Just checking. Thank you for that introduction and for acknowledgement of country, Tessa, and for inviting me. I feel, how do I feel? I feel excited actually now I'm here. I was quite nervous prepping for today because I was really conscious that some folks here might have Matt, you may have come across some of my earlier work, but I've had quite a shift and moved into a more critical space. So I don't want to be like so critical that I'm terrifying to everyone. So if I am, like, tell me. That's not my aim. Anyhow, I was just trying to hold that and think about that this morning. So let me dive into it. Oh, and as usual, I've done too many slides. So I'm going to try to be a bit snappy. And if I don't finish them in time, that's okay, because I'll share all the slides. So I'm sharing perspectives as a MAD identified psychiatric survivor today on lived experience involvement. Tessa's already told you a bit about me and the work that I do, so that's great. That's me. And I think my positionality too, I think it's always useful to mention where I'm speaking from, because we can appear on the surface to have similar work experiences or lived experiences, but actually be speaking from a really different place, which I'll come back to. So, here's some of, my positionalities as a human, what I mean by survivor, which is not always understood and can mean different things in different contexts. And for me, it's actually about multiple layered experiences of violation and dehumanization and silencing, both as a child in terms of a whole variety of kinds of sexual abuse and other forms of abuse and neglect, and then 11 years of abuses in the carceral psychiatric system. And those things, of course, are connected. They have to be connected. And where I speak from theoretically these days is a grounding in MAD studies and survivor research. And if you want to work with my lot, then take time to read work, as you should with any group that you're working with. Read our histories and knowledges. And I also spent a lot of time thinking through abolition feminism and epistemic oppression ideas. And I want to start with this challenge, which is that amazing participation work is totally doable, and you can all do it and do a fantastic job. But in my experience, it rarely happens. There are very few projects that I've been a part of in my life that I would speak well of in terms of participatory practices. And that's a bit depressing. I'm aware. I don't want you all to be disheartened, but done badly, it can be harmful. So I hope, though, because it is doable, people are just often not willing to do what's needed, or can't even see or haven't learned what's needed. I hope you all go forth to do great work. But my message as well would be that if you can't do it well, like pay attention to the kind of things we're talking about today and that many others have said. Be really honest about the level of participation that's in your project. Don't pretend that you're doing co-production if you're not, and really attending to power. Then it's better not to do it. It's better to wait until you can do it and do it well. You know, that would be like a really fundamental message from me. Because we're talking about lived experience, I'll remind us to think about of what when we talk about lived experience. I think it's really tricky language, and it's being used more and more and more in spaces. And I can't offer you actually a useful alternative today. So I'm really conscious of that. So my criticism has to be connected to, I don't know what to tell you you should use instead. But I'd like you to be aware that the language is kind of boundless in a sense, because of course we've all got lived experience of something. What do we mean when we say lived experience? If we don't say of and then something with specificity after that, we're not saying anything meaningful in our work. I think once we know what kinds of lived experience we're working with, it's important to use the preferred language of that group. Otherwise, we risk erasing or hiding really important meanings. So, you know, I have sometimes identified as a person with lived experience. I've had other people call me that. I've had people refer to me as a consumer, and I've used that as well. These days, I identify as a psychiatric survivor with the intention that it will feel discomforting for anyone who works in psychiatry. And that's important to me. So we have to think about the language that people use being important and often intentionally political. And we don't want to homogenise or obscure critical differences in people's experiences. And we don't want to distract either. You know, recently I've heard people speaking about the lived experience movement. I'm not actually aware of any actual lived experience movement or what people mean by that. I've never seen people walk through the streets with placards that say, you know, the lived experience movement. I don't think that's real. I think that's a strange thing that's happening in our time at the moment. But we do have a disability justice movement and CRIP movements, and we have movements by criminalised people and movements by psychiatric survivors. That there are lots of actual movements. So be aware with lived experience language and practices that that doesn't move you away from noticing long and really important histories and bodies of knowledge. And I'm sure you won't, especially now we've talked about it. So I'd encourage you to look for as much specificity in your work as you can. So what experiences are you specifically looking for? Who's most directly impacted by what you're studying? What are the different positionalities within that group? Because even within people who've been in a psychiatric hospital, there are very different experiences, and I'll come back to that. Which voices are most silenced and also most challenging? Take time to think about all that. And one crucial difference I wanted to point out today, this slide alone could open, there could be many other crucial differences as well, but is thinking about if you're working with lived experience groups of people who've experienced oppression, hate, violence, exploitation, or carceral systems. Because not every lived experience is going to be about these things. If someone wants to come and speak to me about my lived experience of, you know, using public transport, actually, I do have some critical things to say about that, but let's pretend I don't. It is going to be very different, right? I don't need you to attend to power in the same ways as if you want me to speak about what happened when police dragged me out of my home and I was locked in a psychiatric unit and strip search. That's a very different experience, and we have to really carefully attend to that. So there are lots of groups of us I've put in that lower dot point, and working with these kinds of lived experiences are going to be often quite different to other groups of lived experience. And these are some key things that there will almost always be long histories and bodies of knowledge, ways of working. We will have our own models of participatory work that we want you to attend to. And be really scrupulous about not replicating harms in your research, because I know you'll not want to do that. This is a quote from Janet Ma, who's done consumer work in mental health for a great many years. And she said, some of us are picked because we're tame. This is picked to be in participatory work or on projects, and we'll go along with whatever is said and done. And others of us are picked to represent because we are known, and it's easier to pick us because we're a known element and there's no surprises. This is all of these reasons to choose people are really problematic. A lot of folks will just always pick their favorite lived experience person, their favorite consumer. And if you're choosing people because we're easy, there's questions about the rigor of your research, really, and what you're finding. So be conscious of this kind of critique. And there's a paper I wrote with Bridget Hamilton and Kath Roper about 5 years ago now that speaks about looking for diverse and challenging experiences and views. And this was focused on consumers and mental health, but you could apply this kind of thinking to any group. And apologies, that's a bit of an intense slide probably, but if you just look to this matrix on the, what side is that, the left? I can never remember the left. It's just basically an idea that I had when I was working, doing lived experience work inside the department where I wasn't allowed to speak to anyone else. And I had to reflect quite hard on where do I need to be looking in my own histories and consumer survivor spaces to make sure I'm holding as much complexity of views as I can when I'm the only person in so many rooms. And what I noticed was that we often speak about different kinds of treatment in the system, that the treatments we were given were positive or negative to some degree. And we also speak about our experiences of care, how we were treated as a human being. And that sometimes people can have a mix of, the treatments really helped me, but as a human, I was treated awfully. And those folks, this is just another version of it, might advocate for more safety and respect, but not speak about the treatments that we're being given. I'm down here. I'm someone who had very negative experiences of treatment and care. So I do much more activist work, and these days I do abolitionist work. What's on these axes might be different for the different groups that you work with, and they might be multidimensional as well. In fact, even in our space, this is simplistic, but it's a helpful reminder that that different experiences are, in fact, I'll jump slides, that people's reality is more complex than this. I just told you that. And I also want to mention that our experiences will be intersectional, of course, with our culture, faith, our gender, sexuality, race, trauma, adversity, inequity, age, a whole lot of other factors. So we can pull this in different ways. So if you're thinking, what does a consumer or a survivor think? Well, with what collection of experiences are we talking about? It's messy. But I want people to remember that the kind of experience we had is another aspect of diversity with multiple dimensions, and to really pay attention to welcoming the tricky, challenging experiences, because these are the experiences most often left out. Certainly in most projects I've seen run by systems with power, they really want to just invite the people who had positive experiences because they say nice things and don't rock the boat. You don't want to do, that's boring research. So a key message used in MAD spaces, but it comes from disability justice, is nothing about us without us is for us. So this is a great principle to hold if you're thinking about doing participatory work. So even if you're involving us in part of your project, how is it about us if we're not involved in other parts of your project? I'm hoping many of you, if you haven't seen already, you either will have seen Arnstein's ladder. Arnstein, I don't know, it doesn't matter. Apologies to Sherry Arnstein. If you haven't seen it yet, I'm sure other people will talk about it as well in your mentoring. But this has been around for a long time and is a really useful way of thinking about moving up the ladder from where people are manipulated through to citizens being in control of work that's done about us and our lives and our circumstances. And here's a version I prepared earlier in a resource that's available for free on my website. And I've been thinking about whether to redo this with an even more critical take. And I'm not sure, I might just do a part 2 version of this in the next year or so. But this is a ladder thinking about this it's a mental health context and consumer survivor perspective. And it uses language that we hear more often. And certainly, informing, consulting, engaging, we see a lot. This is just all awful, really. You do all your research, then you tell us about it afterwards. Engagement and consulting are still doing things for us, and arguably still quite tokenistic. This is really like kind of the minimum levels you want to be in if you're trying to do good quality work, I believe, which is either co-design or better still co-production, where you're working with people. And this is where my research is with my PhD, which is I'm not surprised, proving challenging to some people like ethics committees to understand that I, as a psych survivor, might do research without any clinician involvement at all. So I want you to be aware of this as well, because this is a growing space for those of us in different communities to be doing PhDs, doing community research, and that things might flip. I feel kind of excited about that, so that it might be more other people who are interested in our lives, that you all, if you don't have lived experience of the thing that interests you, might be seeking to be a participant in our research, rather than us trying to be a participant in your research. I think this is quite an exciting time for us, and something to hold in mind, that we can produce and do produce our own knowledge as well. This resource, this is the cover of it, and there's a little, I don't know, I hope some people find it useful, a kind of check sheet that I developed in there, where you can tick the boxes and work out what's the highest level of participation on that ladder you can reach in your project, based on a number of things, like, how many of us are involved, or how does decision making work. So feel free to use that if you'd like. I don't know if people have heard of faux production. It's quite clever language, I think. But we do see a lot of faux production. Be aware of that. But in doing good work, I'd encourage you all to think about building longer term relationships with people, rather than just having us in for one project. Involving lots of us, not just, one or two. Slowing down. Working with us will take a lot longer than you think, and then it will take longer than that, even than what you think. Attending to power, which will be, if it's not something you've focused on before, will require a lot of learning to do, and being honest about what level you're at. Tessa, can I do a quick time check for where I'm at?
Yeah, you've got about 5 more minutes if you
That's
can make that work.
outrageous. Okay, thank you. So what I'll say here is I'll leave this slide as one for you to, is there any points I want to pull out? Actually, I've talked about that. Oh, I did want to say I've heard a lot of people say to me, oh, but we can't really do co-production or co-design in academic contexts, because before we can involve people, we've got to, work out our project proposal, and we've got to get funding, and we've got to get ethics approval. And that's when we start to involve people after all of that. And I would say quite clearly that if you don't involve people till then, it can't possibly be co-production, because everything important has already been decided. And so we have to rethink how we do work. It's totally possible to do things differently, but you might need to think about preliminary projects. So your project might be in 2 or 3 phases, and the first project is actually connecting with people in the lived experience community that you want to work with, and exploring the kinds of aims for research, the kinds of questions, talking about how people would be involved and what would matter. And people are involved with developing their ethics proposal rather than after. Because if we're not part of the question, then why are we there? How is that question even necessarily relevant to our lives? That's a flip in how we think about doing this work, but it's particularly important in academic spaces. And I will mention this in terms of attending to power. Folks like me say all the time that you need to be willing to be discomforted, but I don't think people really understand what that means until you've experienced it. And then when you do experience it, you might say, I don't feel safe. This feels really triggering. I don't like this, or they're wrong. How do I get them out of my project? Being discomforted is really discomforting. And so I really encourage you to talk to folks about that, to think about getting supervision practice from someone with lived experience in the space you're working with, or, you know, from someone who's been considered to be an ally by people with lived experience, not a self-identified ally, and practice. Invite people to challenge you, invite people to tell you if there are things you are saying that actually don't feel great, and because it's hard for anyone. Here's a list of tokenistic things to avoid that you can read later, because I really have to finish now. But I want to mention as well, if it's not something that you know from your own experience, learn about the experience of emotional labour, because this very often is what you're going to be asking people to do in your projects. And I'd encourage you to have conversations with people really early on, and then come back to them all the time about how is the emotional labour in this feeling compared to the labour of coming to the meeting, or, you know, doing the work that's in your plan. Because this painting here is about my experience of emotional labour, and how often in meetings it's the eyes on the top that I'd be showing to the room, really desperately trying not to look like I just wanted to cry and sob and scream about what I just heard someone say around the table, but hiding it because that's what's expected of us, right? And we get tone policed if we don't do that. But actually it was the eyes underneath that came out as soon as I got somewhere away from the project afterwards, or came home and sobbed on my couch. And we need to really, there's important learning in all of this. And perhaps there'll be important findings in your research as well, that this will be part of what you learn in your projects about what it's like for folks. So, and my final point is to think about, like, absolutely make sure you pay people well, pay people on time. Don't put people through horrible bureaucracies. Every university is dreadful at this, so you have to do lots of work to overcome this. But think beyond that. Think about, there is a poem here that was shared with me this week by Claire Atherton, and I find it confronting. I find it beautiful as well. And it talks about, this is about lived experience involvement. I'll walk away leaving you sore, bruised and hurting in the same places and spaces that gave you wounds in the first place. Nothing changed, just a stream of new faces. No solutions to your wounding, no adjustments to be made. You see, I need your data and knowledge in order to get paid. Your data and knowledge feed the beast that soothes our collective conscience. We've reached out to all the oppressed and marginalised. Box ticked, it's all a nonsense. It's a very strong critique of lived experience involvement, but I think a really important one. And one of the things Claire invites us to do is not just to notice the ways that people might be harmed, but also to think about how are we actually contributing back? How is our research not just giving us qualifications or the next grant or a published paper? What are we giving to the people and communities that we should be aiming to serve in our research as well? And this calls on us to be much more creative than the Academy probably wants us to be, but to do it anyway. And there could be all kinds of things. It might be that people say, actually, I want to learn some research skills myself while I'm doing this. So you get people into training. It might be that that you publish some things in really accessible language so that everyone in the community can access it. It might be it might be anything, right? But what are we doing to actually make a material difference in people's lives? It doesn't have to change the world. None of us can change the whole world. It has to matter to the people you're researching with. I know that's hard, but I think it's really important. I'll leave that for you. I've mentioned this already. Be aware not everyone will want to join your project either, but there are other ways you can contribute. So particularly as you move along in your careers and gather more resources, how can you share resources with folks doing the work at the top of the ladder, trying to do research within their own communities with less resources and power than you? What can you loan to people doing that work? And that's all. I know I went over. I'm sorry, Tessa, but thank you. I hope that was helpful. There's resources as well when I share this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Indigo. And I should have said at the start, I guess I'm just so excited that this is, getting off the ground that I forgot to say at the start that we're allowing about 20 minutes for questions at the end. So if you have any questions for Indigo or anything that you saw on the slide that she wasn't able to go into in enough detail, please hold on to it because we've got plenty of time to talk about it at the end. And I'll also note that while Indigo was talking, Associate Director of CERI, Chris May-Lee, who is here, put in some information about some grants that are available through CERI to support lived experience involvement in grants. And I'm just going to pop in a link to Indigo's participation ladder, which she spoke about, so you can access that as well. So now we're going to hear from our next speaker, Ashley Ung, who is a fantastic, I've worked with Ash and Indigo before, and I'm just like, for me, this is just like I'm with my friends talking about my favorite topic. So Dr. Ung is a diabetes advocate and researcher. Her experience and career has stemmed from her lived experience advocacy journey within Australia and internationally. She is currently focused on the research of implementing consumer and community involvement within organisations at Monash Centre for Health Research and Implementation. As a part of this work, she's supporting the development of a national resource to support the adoption of consumer and community involvement across healthcare improvement and health research. So thank you so much, Ash. Let me spotlight you. Oh no.
It would help if I put myself off mute. That would be very helpful, wouldn't it? Thank you. That was a very long presentation. All good? You guys can see my slide? Yeah.
Yeah, looks good.
I don't know how to follow up from Indigo. She's touched on, I guess, the really foundations of what we call consumer and community involvement in Australia really, really beautifully, and the importance of just really being meaningful and mindful of how you do this, because there is potential harm if you don't do it well. And it's quite a daunting thing. Here's my cat. It can be a very daunting thing if this is something that's very new to you, particularly if this is something that is not something you've been trained up on. But this is why we're here. We're here to learn from each other, and it's a good starting point. So as Tessa mentioned, I am a diabetes advocate who has then fallen into research from a lot of different opportunities. And so I've done my PhD through a co-design framework as well, which I didn't know was co-design at the time. And so I'm learning a lot about the space as well. And it's a very much evolving and growing space, which is very exciting to see because, countries like the UK and Canada and even America are actually quite ahead of us when it comes to public and patient involvement or engagement, which for some reason in Australia we call consumer and community involvement. So today I thought I would share with you the work that we've been doing over the last couple of years funded by an MRFF grant to help support the implementation of consumer and community involvement across this huge space, and how Indigo talked about the barriers within the university system around paying consumers and reimbursing them in a timely manner, and the bureaucratic steps that are in the way. And so those are a couple of things that we are trying to sort of fix, I guess, along the way, in sort of encouraging organisations that this process is really important and it needs to be done well, needs to be done right. And that goes with, upskilling ethics committees as well, because ethics should not be a barrier to working with partners, partnering with people with lived experience, with consumers, to get the work done. So we kind of know why consumer and community involvement is important. You know, we've talked about it's really important to have their input from the very start to ensure that whatever you do in your research is impactful, is meaningful, and it's the best use of the research money that is there. So I think one crazy stat that I've heard recently is that, you know, almost half of NHMRC funding goes into the waste bin because it doesn't actually amount to anything, either because it's not completed on time or there's no translation into the community. So if we involve consumers or lived experience from the very start, we can help prioritize what's important to the community. And that really makes a huge impact in terms of, you know, how that comes about down the end. And if you're working in a lab, you might think, oh, you know, that's really way far down the track for me. It's not relevant. It so is. So I work with, immunotherapy and genetic researchers as well on the consumer hat role in the diabetes space. And we're talking about, you know, immunotherapy to help prevent diabetes diagnosis down, or prolonged diabetes diagnosis down the track, delay that. But also, you know, at a very cellular mechanistic point of view as well. And so they go, you know, how do we actually understand this? And a lot of the basic scientists that we work with previously have not even spoken to a person living with diabetes before to actually understand how this condition impacts them on a day-to-day basis. So it's really about, you know, understanding the bigger picture of what you're working on, and then translating that into your research and that sort of coming through, you know, what's priority for them, things like that. So really, we know that there's a problem that exists in the system around consumer and community involvement in terms of its implementation. You know, we know that NHMRC are really mandating that we do consumer and community involvement, but they don't actually tell us how to do it. They share some really broad principles, and so now we are trying to build up that knowledge base of supporting researchers and those with lived experience on how to do that as well. Okay. And this mentoring program is a really good example of one step of doing it. And I would also really love to acknowledge the language. So I know Indigo touched a little bit about that, but it is such a really important thing. You know, you know your community the best. So go into the community, talk to them, build those relationships, and listen to how they talk about the community, how they talk about themselves, what is the preferred language, and reflect that and mirror that and ask them what their preferred language is to use. I know in the diabetes community, we hate being called diabetics. Absolutely hate being called diabetics, diabetic sufferers, cringe. So it's really about, you know, being person-centered, so person living with diabetes. Whereas I know in the autistic space, they prefer the term, I'm an autistic person as opposed to a person with autism. So really nuances between the communities, and you need to be well aware of that space that you're working in as well. So we know that there's a problem that exists in the systems. I'm jumping back and forth. So what is the solution? Well, one part of the solution is investing in building evidence base in consumer and community involvement. We know that some researchers are a little bit harder to convince that this is really important without the right evidence, without a randomized controlled trial. We can't do it. It's very hard to do a randomized controlled trial in consumer and community involvement, but what we're doing is building up the evidence base behind it and using implementation science frameworks to then translate that into real world settings. So I love it. It's very pragmatic research. And so how we're doing this through this grant is by leveraging the Australian Health Research Alliance Research Translation Centres. So ARA is made up of 12 to 14 research translation centres across Australia who aims to bridge the gap between research institutions, health services, as well as the community. So they have lots of different initiatives around how they can do that. And one of the key things that they have prioritised since 2017 is consumer and community involvement. So since then, they've been building up the evidence base, doing surveys, reaching out and seeing what works, running training as well. So Monash Partners, Latrobe is a partner, is a member of Monash Partners, which is the Research Translation Centre. So you guys have access to all of this stuff already. It's just about finding it. And sometimes it is hard to find. If you don't know it, you don't know it. And so Monash Partners as the research centre then partnered with MICRI, the Monash Centre for Health Research and Implementation, to then provide that rigour around the evidence-based methodologies as well as the Western Australian Health Translation Network based in WA, who have a massive sort of network of consumers, around 7,000 or so. And we want to see how they've built and maintained that and what they're doing in consumer and community involvement there as well, and bring it back here. So overall, the research that we've done over the last 2 years, we did a national survey where we had 128 consumers, 42 healthcare improvement staff. So these could be consumer engagement officers, they could be clinicians who work in the quality improvement space, and there could be patient satisfaction officers as well. Like every hospital has different terms, as well as health and medical researchers. And these researchers spanned different types of research. So they could be basic and foundation researchers, they could be translation research, clinical researchers, etc. And then we did semi-structured interviews with funding bodies, as well as consumers, healthcare improvement staff, and researchers. And then from there, we then did co-design workshops and consultations. So we had 4 massive co-design workshops with the different key stakeholders, all in the same room. And then once we built a prototype, we reached out to individuals to sort of get more feedback as well. And we also had input from our Monash Partners Consumer Advisory Panel, as well as the ARA Consumer and Community Involvement Advisory Committee. So it's a back and forth iteration. It's not just a set and go. And I think this is a really key thing we're finding out now for people doing consumer and community involvement in research, is that they think if we just throw in a focus group, it's called consumer involvement. That's a research methodology. If you just have that one touch point, you're not really doing a co-design framework. There's lots of different ways of doing it, but it's that whole process of, going back and forth and nuancing, is this right, touching base and getting that feedback through as well. And I acknowledge that there are many different frameworks that exist, which can be quite confusing to navigate through, but underpinning all those frameworks, the principles are generally the same. And then now that we are sort of developing the Health Research Hub, we've got a pilot evaluation that will be rolled out soon once the hub is launched as well. So it's coming, working very hard on it. And really the purpose of all the research is to understand the knowledge, attitudes, beliefs, barriers and facilitators to consumer and community involvement, which then shape the key messages and the content that will be featured on the hub. So I just wanted to point out some of these things, as well as to then emphasize what Indigo has said in a bit more of a different condition type consumer involvement space. So we know some of the key resources, they're everywhere, but then it's, once you start Googling them, you don't know which ones to go to. So what we've done with the hub is to try to curate key resources that we think would be relevant and most critical for those who are, particularly starting out in consumer and community involvement. So these include the NHMRC statement, which is currently under review, the principles for consumer involvement from the MRFF, the National Consumer Engagement Strategy for Health and Wellbeing. And that's a really, really amazing document that highlights frameworks and really practical strategies. And it's currently in a draft consultation format at the moment, so it will be updated down the track. The UK have really great standards for public involvement and principles as well as a framework for trauma-informed practice, because it's one thing to just go out into the community and start asking them, but you need to be really mindful of how you're doing that, the types of questions. And sometimes this is why you might, want to reach out to, a couple of people first to kind of test things out. So people that you built relationships with and trust them to give you that feedback, and you feel safe doing that as well, before you go out more broadly and just go and unleash your research on them, because that's not how we do it. So that's part of the hub. And then we also will have sort of tailored information. And I thought I really wanted to highlight this, particularly because this is some of the questions we get at Monash Partners a lot when it comes to consumer and community involvement is, how do we work with them? We don't really know what to do. We don't really know how to work with them, and it's not relevant to my research, so it's too hard. It's all in the too hard basket. So really, we've got sections around, how to find, what are the things to consider when you're looking for, the right person for your role? What are the processes that you can put in place? Have an expressions of interest, have a terms of reference, have a bit of a check, have a bit of an onboarding process for the consumers, so that they know what they're getting into. You have that shared similar expectations from the very get-go, So they know what to expect from you, and then you have to be held accountable to that as well. So responsibility comes from both sides. And here are some of the different resources that go along with some of the content as well. So ACTA has a really good toolkit for those that are looking into clinical trials. They've got a really good toolkit to support that consumer involvement all the way through from planning to preparing a budget and things like that as well. The Western Australian Health Translation Network have a really awesome handbook for consumer and community involvement that's targeted at consumers, at researchers and organizations. So a lot of the content we've sort of adapted and popped on here as well. And then the first two resources are, the first one I think is American from memory. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it gives you different methodologies of community participatory research methods. And the second one's a really nice sort of interactive map from Canada, I want to say, around public and patient engagement. So you can see the terminology is quite different depending on where you pull the resources from, which again makes the space a little more challenging to navigate if you don't know the terms to put in and things as well. The last thing I wanted to talk about with the hub is really it's also going to be a place for connection. We know that a lot of people have questions around this, and sometimes it's hard to find that connection or that network within your own organization. You guys are really lucky that you have this mentoring program as well, but it's also about diversifying your inputs and perspectives. And so we've started up a LinkedIn discussion group. And really what we're hoping in this pilot phase is to sort of test out and see who actually come to play in this group. What are the discussions going to be like? It is open to anyone and everyone, and we're really targeting sort of people in the Australian space and the research space in different conditions. We anticipate that there will be limitations, so not everyone is on LinkedIn, particularly with consumers. We might only capture the elite consumers that are there, but it's a good trial and pilot to sort of see how that goes, and different ideas of how we can then engage more people at the very outset. And so I guess one thing that we keep discussing as well is that this is really just a really broad resource nationally. There needs to be a lot of work that's done within the organizational space. So within research institutes, within research translational centers, within health services, to then build up those networks at a more local level and resources as well. So different organizations will have different resources that are tailored specifically for them. I know at Monash, we have very different processes for reimbursing consumers, depending on even which department you work with, which is absolutely ridiculous. So really we're trying to, clean up our own backyard before we tout that, we're the best in this space. But it is a work in progress, and it is about, pitching the right, the right message to the right people at the right level to get these changes going through. And if you think about it, it's almost like a, customer service experience. Like, how are people experiencing this from the other end? If you're a consumer coming into your research project that you're proposing, how are they going to feel about all the different things that you're imposing on them, the relationship that you're building? Is it a two-way conversation? Is there regular communication coming through? Do they get asked to actively participate in the meetings, or do they just sit there, with their cameras off kind of thing? Like, these are some really little simple things that you can do to engage with. And I know one of the main barriers that a lot of people talk about is the lack of funding to do that, but you don't need a lot of funding to really start things off. Like, I know there's a lot of work being done to provide seed funding pre-award to do consumer and community involvement, but little things like, organizing a small focus group, taking someone out for coffee to just talk to them about ideas. It really just starts with that relationship building. And Indigo mentioned, aim for building long-term relationships. That is really what you want there. And that can be as simple as buying some, morning tea snacks, having tea and coffee available. It doesn't have to be a big thing. And you could say, you have to be really upfront with them and say, look, we don't have money to pay you for this opportunity now, but we want to work with you to get this grant. And then once we're written into this grant, you will get a paid role in it, and then talk that out through as well. So that really comes back down to my top tips. is really seek out the resources that you find helpful for you and that's relevant for your setting and your research. I know the resources for engaging or involving consumers in diabetes is very different to, say, working with people who have dementia or working with people who have arthritis. These different organizations have their own resources and their go-to kits as well. So please find your local network and connect with them. You can take very small steps, but these small steps actually may build into really big things. From little things, big things grow. And it's really about them being open to those conversations. Indigo said, sit in that discomfort zone, and that's okay. And that's that process. And that's why you involve them from the very start, because if you don't, and you go through your ethics and then you bring your consumers on board and they say, well, this isn't really going to work in terms of the community because you're not going to get anyone to come into this place. You need to go out to them. You have to go back to the drawing board, and you're wasting time, effort, resources doing that. So go from the start and be open. Don't go to them with a plan that's already set out and in place, because that's tokenistic, right? Go there and say, this is what we're thinking of. We'd love to get your input. How can we make sure that we are doing this right and doing this well and maximizing our impact? So an example of is a really good example is this grant. We had a consumer partner who was involved from the conception of the project all the way through to the methodology development, the analysis, the write-up, and I'm really good friends with her now. So she's basically like my little foster grandmother, I say. So she's been a huge impact in my life in understanding how this works as well and furthering my knowledge in the space, which is amazing. And lastly, remember the why. Why are you doing this research? Is it just a job? Well, some people it's just a job, and that's great, but you're not going to get further funding if you treat it as a job. Why are you doing this piece of research? Who is it going to impact at the end of the day? What are the end outcomes that are going to be produced? You trace that back and think back to the big picture of why. Why did you get into this, working into this health condition in the first place? And hopefully that should remind you as to why we work with consumers and partner with them from the very outset, and how it can impact your research down the other end as well. So I just want to leave you with some of the acknowledgements with, all the people that made this project happen. And I'm happy to take any questions with Indigo. Stop sharing this.
Thanks, Ash. So for the next sort of 10 minutes, we're going to do questions. And then, and I'm trying to do too many things at once. And then we'll do the last half hour will be just, so from 1 p.m, it'll be just for people in the mentoring program. So we'll do 10 minutes of questions and then we'll close this part of the session. So feel free to raise your hands or pop it in the chat. Bianca, go. I saw you raise your hand, but if people could use the one that makes you pop up, that would be helpful. But Bianca, you can go first because you were so quick.
Sorry, I thought they were brilliant presentations, absolutely brilliant. I've been away for a bit, so it's a great thing to listen to and to be inspired by. I'm just going to ask you, Indigo. Sorry, my name's not up there. I'm Bianca. I'm not sure how to change that, but so are you part of are you part of the MAD movement as part of your research and studies?
Yeah. So I'm drawing on MAD studies literature, and I identify as MAD, and get involved with various MAD projects outside of formal research as well.
Yes, I was just interested in that. Yeah, fantastic.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm part of that as well. So yeah, but I've been reading the articles, but
fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, welcome, and it's lovely to have you here.
Oh, thank you.
Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, cricket.
Ooh. Oh, my cat's she wasn't here at the start and now she is really here for it. Carol, go ahead. What's your question?
Oh, thank you very much for great presentations and really thought-provoking ones as well. I suppose I just wanted to I have only had limited involvement. I've done some research with consumers as co-researchers, and I just have to say it was the best research I've ever done. And I just think what you achieve is so much better. And so just saying it shouldn't be something that we feel we have to do, but actually just from a personal perspective, it is so much more rewarding as well. So probably not, sorry, not a question, sorry.
No, it's good to get that validation.
But probably just, I just probably have one question around, because the consumer researchers I've worked with, was a project that we did together. It was funded. It was wonderful. We had actually been working together. We'd been on the consumer participation working group, and so there were hodgepodge, a lot of us. But we did do a lot of around education, so to enable consumers to feel confident with things like conducting interviews in our research and that sort of thing. We partnered, so you might have had someone who had done a lot of interviews as part of data collection, partnering with someone, a consumer research. So it was more around, and they did a fabulous job. So it was more around supporting and making sure that they've had the confidence. But on the flip side, they taught us so much as well. So we were all learning, and that's what made it fabulous. But just your comments on perhaps how more around, particularly involving consumers as co-researchers, any gems around supporting and that sort of stuff.
Did you want to comment, Ashley? I'm happy to comment as well. But...
Yeah, I think consumers as co-researchers, it's a fairly new thing. I think particularly for NHMRC and MyPrep, they love having sort of, co-leads in there, right? But they often underestimate how much time is actually needed to train consumers up to the level where it's, the work that you're doing is rigorous and they're comfortable doing it. And so that's another thing we're advocating for as well is, you can't just have a 2-year grant and say, you're going to have co-researchers coming and do the work amazingly. Like we struggled to get this work done in 2 years. But I think what you've done is, it sounds brilliant in terms of, training them up, making sure they're confident. Confidence is a really key thing, but also being able to sort of do those, that interviews independently is great. And so it is that upskilling, and they then leave with that as well. So I think that's a really lovely way of doing it. And it helps that, some communities respond a lot better to having people within their own circle do that piece of work, and they have that context as well they can apply as well. So I'll say, well done.
Cool.
Indigo?
Yeah. And so what can I add on to that? My mind, of course, went straight to my PhD, which it's hard to think about anything except for your PhD when you're in that space. Oh my gosh. But yeah, like in my project, I was thinking how you can think about co-researchers in different ways. So you might do a project where you've got like a participatory approach, maybe say you're doing a kind of co-production, and so you have a research team, and more than half of your team or half of your team are consumers or psych survivors, and you're doing the research together, and folks are doing interviews as well, and all of that work. And then there might be another group though who are participants, who also have lived experience. So there's that kind of approach, which I imagine is perhaps what happens a lot. And I just want to share, like in my PhD, I'm doing it a bit differently, where I kind of don't have participants. I only have co-researchers. So the people you might think of traditionally as, the participants that we're, extracting data from or something, we're actually collaborating the whole way through. So it's collective and collaborative in terms of understanding what it is we're seeking to make meaning about, but we do the meaning making, the analysis together as well. So I just want to share, we can think about that in different ways, and also hold that that there will be people in increasing spaces, but certainly in MAD mental health spaces, where many of us will already have research skills, and others won't, and there'll be variations in that. So we're not always the ones who don't have the skills, but I think it's lovely to think about projects where who's got what skills and what can we share with folks who don't have those, and that can create mutuality.
Yeah, look, I'm sorry, Tessa, just one little thing. I think you hit the nail on the head about it has to be meaningful. So the topic that we were researching was really, we were all very passionate about it, and everyone on the research team. And so that made it very meaningful. So it was really easy for people to come together and last the distance and commit to upskilling and all that sort of thing. So I think if looking at genuinely partnering with consumers or people with lived experience, there has to be some meaningful for them. And even just reimbursement, I don't think that will, it's a bit like, we work, we get a wage, but there's other stuff that we get out of work. So that's really important too.
Yeah, all those things matters. And particularly, as both of us were saying, getting us in really early, even before it's early, if you're building relationships with folks in community, you don't have to wait till the project starts. You're discussing things. Something popped into my head before when I was invited into wasn't research, but it was like a policy space, a discussion. And I was of course, the only consumer survivor in the entire room of loads, and everyone else was a clinician or allied health. And the question everyone wanted to explore was, how do we stop people absconding? I don't like that language. I prefer the language of escaping. Feels more what we're doing. How do we stop people absconding from inpatient units? And that's a question that has absolutely no interest to me whatsoever. I celebrate that people find ways, as did I, to escape from places that are harmful. But a question that might interest me, that I talked about at the time, was how do we offer services that people don't feel the need to escape from? Feels like a much more relevant question. Like if your place is that bad, people are breaking down the doors to get out. The question is not how to stop that. It's a different question. And that's the kind of example of, if you're in conversation with us, we can bring a totally different worldview or a different standpoint to what you're thinking about.
Kate, sorry, go ahead. What was your question?
Hi, thank you so much for such interesting presentations. You might have actually already answered my question. I'm a physiotherapist. I'm doing a pilot study with a team of about 15 and 5 people with lived experience. I wanted to do like legitimate kind of way, and so we're all just on the team together, but maybe some of the things you mentioned, Ashley, in terms of just how to approach that. I know some people have committees of consumers to sort of consult with, rather than doing it all in the team together. I think it's fine where I'm at, but in terms of, is there a better way, having people as direct researchers on your team versus a consulting group? From your previous discussion, I'm sort of feeling like it's what is everyone's skills? How do we work together? What's going to work? But yeah, interested if time permits, if you have any additional thoughts around that.
Yeah, well, I think firstly what I'll say is there's no one size fits all when it comes to consumer and community involvement. Like every project will approach things differently for a variety of different reasons, and there's no right or wrong way. So if your way of doing it in terms of having like a reference group where you go back to the consumers and say, we just wanted to double check what these questionnaires are going to look like and what the focus groups are going to look like, and that works for you, then that's great. If you have a consumer lead in the project, and then, that person can be your first go-to in terms of having, going through the questions and then going into a consumer reference group. It depends on how big that project is as well and what your resources are. So for the MRFF grant that we had a consumer lead, and then on the steering committee, we had 3 additional consumers, which then we ran sort of very high level things across and said, this is the general direction of what we're going through. But when it comes to day-to-day project, we had the consumer lead that we sort of liaised with more frequently. And then for sort of big discussion things that we wanted to go to, we would have our consumer advisory panel. And they would be made up of people who have connections within the community. So we reached out to, cold communities, we reached out to people with disabilities, and we made sure they were a very representative group. But the project itself, like, they weren't a consumer advisory panel specific to the project. They also talked to lots of different projects that were happening across the Monash partner space as well. So if you had an opportunity to sort of tap into a group like that, that would be great. Again, it depends on the resources that you have and the project that you're looking to do, that you can really just tailor it to what your needs are as well. Indigo, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think I'd just say, Kate, to go back and, you know, you have a look at the participation ladders of whatever version. You don't have to look at my version, but and that can help with the thinking around that. So what you're talking about is probably like at the consultation level or possibly at the engagement level. And I think if that's what you can do, then that's what we should do. I think my main point will be don't call that co-design or co-production. That's, you know, when I talk about honesty with involvement, because it'll be frustrating. People will come in expecting something very different. You know, so we've got to describe things honestly around what they are. So if consultation, do consultation, but do consultation really well.
Thank you both. That's so helpful.
Thank you so much, Ash and Indigo. I need to close the session now because we've gone 2 minutes over. So 2 minutes over for the first hour part, which is the public facing part. So I'd like to thank you both so much. I'd also really like to thank the CERI team who did all the administration for the event and have just been like a real, like, we couldn't have done this event without them. Mentoring participants, mentees and mentors, please stick around. We're going to talk about some stuff specific to the program. But yeah, thanks again, everyone, for coming. Thank you. Thank you, Indigo and Ash. Thank you, CERI team. And thanks to the steering committee as well, which is, you know, people who are supporting the program itself. So that's Chris Mayley, Lisa Brophy, Piers Gooding, Anne-Marie Laslett, and Claire, and Claire Overy. So thank you very much. We'll give it maybe 2 or 3 minutes and then we'll start back again for the last half hour where we'll just talk about the program.